Just yesterday, Shams sent out a tweet about another trade going down this offseason that normally would be a top story on every NBA account in this country. A former number 1 overall pick had just been traded by the team that drafted him 2 years ago. Not to a contender, not for a haul of picks. He was basically an afterthought for a third team tossed into a trade whose real headline was Lou Dort going to Atlanta. His name? Zaccharie Risacher. 2 years ago, the Atlanta Hawks used the number 1 pick in the entire draft on him. And today, he got shipped out to the Dallas Mavericks. And outside of the Mavs and Hawks fan base, pretty much no one cared. But that's what I want to talk about today. Not about just what happened to Zaccharie, but how a number 1 first pick overall can fall so far off the radar that his trade just becomes a footnote. But to understand why nobody seems to care about the Zaccharie trade, you have to go back to why the Hawks were even stuck with him in the first place. The 2024 draft class didn't have a Victor Wembanyama. It didn't have a Cooper Flagg. Just a lot of players with a lot of question marks. Coming out of the lottery, Atlanta was staring at a genuinely difficult decision between 2 Frenchmen, Zaccharie Risacher or Alexander Sarr. But Zaccharie was viewed as the safer bet of the two. He was a 3-and-D wing with a high floor that could easily be plug and play, while Sarr on the other hand was viewed as a bit of a gamble with a high ceiling. He was a 7-footer with a pretty rare shooting touch and defensive versatility, but a much rawer offensive game. Now, in a normal year, a team doesn't usually have to pick between safe and upside, because normally that's just who the number 1 pick is. But this was not a normal year. And the way that Atlanta ended up choosing the safe option over the ceiling has almost nothing to do with what was going on the court. Because Atlanta didn't really pick Zaccharie over Sarr. Sarr picked himself out of Atlanta. The Hawks general manager Landry Fields actually said it directly in a radio interview before the draft that Sarr had a pre-draft workout scheduled with the team, but then just simply declined to show up. Multiple reports at the time suggested that Sarr and his camp were steering him towards the Washington Wizards instead, where he'd land in a younger, more wide open situation that would give him more opportunities to develop and shine. Now, Sarr never fully admitted to snubbing Atlanta on the record. At one of his pre-draft media sessions, he was asked about declining the workout, and he responded by saying that he had a great team of agents around him and wasn't going to get into where he did or didn't work out, which pretty much confirms that the Hawks did not lie. So Atlanta's hand was basically forced. With the best prospect in the class unwilling to even meet with them, they turned to the guy who wanted to be there. Zaccharie went number 1, and Sarr fell to the Washington Wizards at number 2. And almost immediately, the discord around the pick wasn't that Atlanta got his guy. It was that Atlanta had to settle. And ultimately, it would be up to Zacharie's play to either erase it or confirm it. And in the beginning, it was honestly looking pretty good for our boy Zach. In the 75 games he played for the Hawks in the 24-25 season, he averaged 12.6 points, 3.6 rebounds, and 1.2 assists, finishing as the runner-up for the Rookie of the Year award, losing not to Alexander Sarr, but to a budding all-star and 4th overall pick, Stephon Castle. Zach did start the year slow, as most 19-year-old prospects do, but he closed the year on an absolute heater. After the All-Star break, he averaged 14.6 points and 4 rebounds on 40.7% shooting from the 3-point territory, flashing exactly the 3-and-D upside that Atlanta had bet on. So for a moment, it looked like the safe pick was going to pay off the way safe picks are supposed to. Now try to say that 3 times fast. You're probably not going to get a superstar, but a legitimate long-term piece with maybe some all-star upside. All the Hawks fans who spent the summer furious about missing out on Sarr were starting to think that maybe their guy just needed some time. Well, until year 2 happened. Instead of building on how he finished off the last season, Zaccharie got worse. Like, a lot worse. His scoring dropped from 14.6 points per game post All-Star to just 9.6 in his sophomore season, where everyone usually gets much better. And his head coach also seemed to stop believing in him. His role shrank from starting 73 games as a rookie down to just 46 as a sophomore. He stopped being a prospect that was developing into a solid starter in the league and was instead phased into a minor bench role. Like, this wasn't some dramatic first pick collapse. It was just a guy quietly disappearing from the rotation until you realize that you haven't thought about him in weeks. And while Zaccharie was fading in Atlanta, the one player picked after him was doing the exact opposite. Alexander Sarr, the player who skipped his own workout to avoid the Hawks, broke out in Washington. By his second season, he showed a sizable improvement in his game, as sophomores usually do, and was even putting up monster performances like the 27 points and 11 rebounds that he put up in a win against Zachary's Hawks. But what really stings for Atlanta is that development arc. Sarr had entered the league with great defensive tools, but a raw offensive baseline. He shot just 39.4% from the floor as a rookie, but in year 2, he completely answered the efficiency questions, boosting his field goal percentage up almost 10 whole percent, while also expanding his scoring volume to 16.3 points per game. So while Sarr corrected his biggest flaws and got better, Zachary's offensive efficiency flatlined and his volume disappeared, proving that all the haters were actually right. The Hawks whiffed, and the guy who refused to work out with them was the better prospect all along. That's the brutal irony sitting underneath this entire saga. Atlanta didn't just draft a player who underperformed. They drafted the player that they had no choice but to, while the actual player they wanted unethically engineered his way to a division rival and made good on it. Which brings us back to yesterday, July 19th, 2026, the trade that finally ended Zach's career in Atlanta. The headline of the trade was never about Zaccharie. It was Lou Dort, an all-defensive wing with a questionable reputation, moving on from OKC to Atlanta. Zaccharie and Ryan Nembhard were just the pieces that got attached to make all the money work. 3 second-round picks were routed to OKC. Like, damn. Find yourself someone who loves you like OKC loves second-round picks. Nembhard and Lou Dort go to Atlanta, and Zaccharie, well, he heads to Dallas. Now, why did Dallas even do this? And what is their new president, Masai Ujiri, even cooking up? Well, I think that they're betting on Zaccharie somehow finding a way to rediscover his rookie year form. Hopefully. He'll be entering what is largely a developmental role and is probably coming off the bench behind a crowded forward group. It's pretty much just an incredibly low-risk gamble for Dallas. If it works out, then great. They pretty much got a lottery-level talent for a second-round pick. But if it doesn't, then who cares? Because they can just decline his $17.4 million team option in the 2027-28 year. That is not a trade for a former #1 pick. That's a trade for a guy that nobody's even sure is a rotation player anymore. Now here's my read on why this whole thing pretty much generated no noise. First, the 2024 class itself was never taken seriously. There was no consensus superstar, which meant that no matter what you picked, it was probably a gamble. Which is why the safe option backfiring is kind of hilarious. But yeah, when your entire class gets remembered as one of the weakest in recent memory, it's hard for a single player's failure to feel like a shock. Second, Zacharie's tenure in Atlanta was defined by somebody else's decision before it was defined by his own play. His story was never really Zaccharie Risacher, the #1 pick. It was the guy Atlanta got stuck with after Sarr said no, which is a pretty brutal narrative to have immediately, because it means your bust label was basically pre-written. And third, the part that stings the most if you're a Hawks fan, the player picked directly after him at #1 is out there validating everything people feared. That Alexander Sarr was supposed to be the guy who went #1 in that draft. Of course, ignoring everything that we know about Stephon Castle today. That dude is a baller. But none of this means that Zaccharie Risacher's career is over. He's only 21 years old. He's landing in a Dallas system where he won't have the pressure of a #1 pick anymore. He'll just be a low-stakes development project alongside Cooper Flagg and possibly Kyrie Irving. It wouldn't be the first time a former lottery pick found a second chance on a roster with much lower expectations. But that's pretty much all I wanted to talk about in this video. A former #1 pick who just got traded on a random Sunday in July, and it barely made the news. Because his entire story from the moment that Atlanta was on the clock was written by somebody else's decision not to show up. Anyways, that's all I have for you guys. Let me know if you think that Zach was just a victim of unfair expectations, or were the expectations fair and he really is just a bust? Also, when the hell is LeBron gonna choose a team? I have a whole trip coming up soon and I'm not even sure I'll be here for the video. So if you don't see it on the day of, just know that it's because LeBron did it to screw me, okay? Anyways, thanks for watching. Subscribe.